I'm joined today, as John said, we are unfortunately missing one panelist. If they do come through, obviously we'll be able to integrate their views as well. But I'm also joined by Nikki and Thomas, who, if you drop your cameras on now, I'll probably let you introduce yourself. You do a much better job than me at saying who you are and what you do and your sort of interaction with energy storage. So, Nikki, if we could jump to you first for a quick introduction.
Hello. I'm going to put my headphones down because I'm not sure they're working. But it's lovely to see everyone. So my name is Nikki Pillinger. I work for a company called Roadnight Taylor. So I essentially manage grid connections post-acceptance. So this is a wide range of technologies, but obviously one of those ones that we work with is storage. Quite a lot of the time we have hybrid projects. We have EV paired with storage. It's quite a diverse technology, and it's something that we're seeing a huge increase on the grid, including massive transmission projects, as well as a lot of distribution projects. But everything's getting bigger, as we all know, and there's a huge amount of storage potential out there.
Brilliant, yeah. And from our discussion we had before this call, for those on the call who want to get into the technical details, I'm sure Nikki will absolutely able to provide the grid code and all this stuff that completely baffles my brain, but a really good perspective to have. Thomas, did you want to just quickly introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so Tom Verghese. I work for EnerSys. EnerSys are a large multinational US-based company. Fundamentally, we supply batteries worldwide, mostly to the industrial sector, where we are involved in other areas. We've been around for hundreds of years, literally. So there's a lot of experience within the company in terms of battery supply. So we're at the forefront now of what's becoming a new and exciting area.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of the questions that we've got coming up are focused around that. This is an area that is really exciting and seeing a lot of interest and a lot of action at the moment, but also we're looking sort of 5, 10, 20 years into the future. It could be an industry that is absolutely huge compared to what it is already today. By way of introduction for myself as well, so as John said, I'm a principal analyst at Regen. So at Regen, we're a non-profit centre of energy expertise. Myself personally, I've done a lot of work with the energy networks, so various DNOs and gas networks, and even National Grid ESO, looking at sort of the future of energy and net zero scenarios and how technologies like battery storage might fit into a radically different world if we look to decarbonise very quickly over the next couple of decades. Regen also manages ESN, the Electricity Storage Network, which is a UK industry group dedicated to electricity storage. So my colleague Ollie Franklin, who heads that up, I've borrowed quite a lot of his insights to sort of beam to you today via me. So hopefully it should be a really good session. If we do have our fourth panelist join, I'll let him introduce himself. It's Francisco de Leon from New York University. So if he does join, we'll also get a perspective from the sort of an American perspective of their systems and how they might compare or be different to the UK problems and issues and opportunities that we're seeing at the moment. So the first thing we wanted to discuss, very topical in the news over the last few weeks, is that we saw that recently National Grid ESO had to manage a huge amount of excess renewable generation. There was a lot of solar, it's been incredibly sunny, and there was also a lot of wind, both onshore and offshore. And what this led to was this sort of passing and negotiating power back and forth via interconnectors and having to pay hundreds of pounds per megawatt hour to effectively dump that excess power into neighbouring countries. Even before that, we're also seeing a lot of curtailment of wind and solar, especially wind in the north, up in Scotland, where the grid isn't yet able to actually transmit that all the way down to the demand centres, particularly in the south of England. And things are being curtailed, lovely renewable generation is being curtailed in the north, and fossil fuel flexible power generation is being fired up in the south to meet that imbalance of demand. All of this is happening at a time when electricity prices are still really high. We've come down under the government price cap, but it's still really high. And consumers are having to foot that bill, whether it's directly through their energy bills or through future taxation, where there's been support schemes. is this to the panel? Is this the kind of thing that energy storage will be looking to prevent, or is this inherent in a high renewable system? Thomas, if I could jump to you first, is this something that you see energy storage solving, or is this something that's just a part of a wider problem?
I think it's the latter, to be honest. I think this sort of large scale, the power's in the wrong place type problem. I don't necessarily think that energy storage is at the moment able to deal with that. Maybe it will 20, 30 years time, but at the moment, no. I see energy storage being part of the solution, particularly at a lower level, more local level moving forward. But no, at the moment, I don't think we're going to see large distribution center type filled with batteries that are able to store and pour energy into the system at different times.
Excellent. Nikki, how are you along the same lines, or have you got a slightly different perspective on that one?
Certainly broadly agree with Thomas. I don't think it would solve that issue. I think going forward, we're going to see quite a different world for the network. We're going to see different designs for generators. There's a lot more hybrid generators being built now. There's a lot of solar paired with storage, wind paired with storage, or even with hydrogen. So there is actually a lot more consideration as to where that excess energy would go. There's also quite a lot of plans in place from National Grid in terms of, I don't know if anyone's heard of the holistic network design, but this is essentially it's worth looking up if you haven't seen it. This is essentially a new sort of network design that actually puts a lot of like bootstrap interconnectors in. So where we've got those problems in, lots of wind in Scotland, for example, that can't actually then get down to the south. These bootstrap interconnectors across the country actually aim to alleviate that problem in terms of distributing electricity more effectively. And in the future, we're also going to have so that the National Grid ESO is going to be taking on this future system operator role, which I think is going to be quite interesting for energy developers. It's quite a shake-up of the industry in terms of them potentially having more whole system energy planning. And that capacity and potentially being more allocated by sort of technology and capacity in certain areas where it's needed. Oh, Francisco's here. Amazing.
I was just going to say, Francisco, thank you very much for joining us. I'm glad
I have been here for 15 minutes, but I wasn't let into the room.
In the wrong box, no problem. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll come up with a question?
Yeah, I can follow up on the question. I think in the short term, there will be no great projects in energy storage either here in the US. The reason is that energy storage on any of the technologies is still a lot more expensive than normal traditional generation. So by orders of magnitude, at the moment, probably 3 orders of magnitude, maybe 2 orders of magnitude in best conditions. So while energy storage will be, if made economically viable, that would resolve the problem of greenhouse emissions. We will just be able to generate with green technologies, store it, and reuse it whenever we need it. So it's a great thing to do energy storage, but we are far.
Yeah, excellent. Do you want to quickly introduce who you are and how you interact with energy storage in your day-to-day?
Oh, okay. I am Francisco de Leon. I am a professor at New York University. I am also the editor-in-chief of the IEEE Transactions on Power Delivery. And the way I interact with storage is mostly related to grid interactions to see peak shaving and those sorts of things. So in large-scale utility, that would be my connection with energy storage.
Perfect, good. I think we've got a really good, diverse set of views and experiences on the panel, which should lead to some really interesting conversations. I thought it was really interesting sort of I mean, in terms of deploying energy storage, we're seeing some energy storage being deployed in the UK. We're seeing a much bigger pipeline of energy storage that's yet to deploy. So is your feeling, Francisco, that pipeline of potential projects is maybe waiting for those costs to fall and it's not quite viable yet? Or is it something that's actually going to sort of drip through over the next few years?
There are some markets in which energy storage is possible today. For example, the price of electricity where I live in New York City in particular, at some points of the year is very expensive. So it goes a couple of orders of magnitude higher than the base. So on those points, it's possible, economically possible to store energy when it is inexpensive, let's say in the middle of the night, and then sell it at the peak of the next day. So it's already possible. The other concern I have about it is that power utilities, distribution utilities, don't really want, even though there is a lot of talk of, yes, let's incorporate energy storage, the reality is that they don't make it easy. So just like they are being forced by the regulation to accept, but it's not made easy by the utilities to incorporate private producers or energy storage projects into their system. So they look at for example, what is the power coming in, what is the power coming out, and then the utility always has to do the study of whether or not a project is viable, and because they don't give the information of how the utility is, the wires where they are, the impedances, and so forth. So they have to do the study, and frequently the study is not viable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think. Well, Nikki and Thomas, I mean, from your perspective, when you're working with clients within your company, are you seeing sort of electricity storage not being treated as a solution by the networks, but more as another form of load and generation that they've got to manage?
Exactly. You put it exactly. For them, it's not a solution. For them, it's just another source of generation or load. That's it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Nikki, is that something you're seeing when you're working with your connections teams? Is that an issue when you're dealing with the network?
So really interesting question, and really good to hear an American perspective on it as well, because we are so the networks are actually having a look at doing that differently in the UK. So historically, I heard someone call them Schrodinger's battery, because they were kind of assumed to be on and sort of importing and also exporting at full all of the time, which is not an ideal assumption in terms of how battery storage is going to behave on the network. There's been an assertion for quite a long time from developers that sort of battery storage will be a benevolent impact on the network. And the DNOs and National Grid are kind of catching up to this. So because we've got such a huge amount of over-contracted generation on the grid at the moment, we've got something like 360 gigawatts. Our peak is 40, 45 or something like that at the moment. So it's way more than we need that we've got contracted. So we've got these huge sort of theoretical overloads on various parts of the grid because of that amount of generation that is going to connect, and therefore a huge amount of reinforcement that needs to be done before that can happen. So in order to start kind of trying to alleviate a little bit of that, part of the NGSO as 5-point plan is to actually remodel how they're treating batteries on the network. And modelling them as a benevolent influence. So, and also putting a potential constraint on them where they would not, or where they would cause overloads or not sort of act in the interest of the network, i.e. sort of, charging at peak times in the evening. In reality, it is quite interesting to look at how batteries do behave, because sometimes they can charge up just before the peak, essentially just extending a peak. So I think what lies ahead is quite a complex task for both the networks in terms of figuring out how batteries do behave, getting that data and figuring out how that is going to affect their networks. And then for investors in storage to actually figure out how they are going to run their storage facility when they potentially don't have free rein to import and or export all of the time when they want to. They have to be a benevolent impact on the grid, and that's very, very difficult when you're trying to stack lots of various revenue streams. There's a huge amount of different revenue stacks that batteries can potentially tap into. Some of them are conflicting with potentially what some areas of the grid might need at one time. So immensely complex, by the way, and being done by much cleverer people than I am. Yes, hopefully that answers the question a little bit in that the networks are looking at storage a bit differently here now. Very new, but that is being done.
Absolutely, and it's evolving very quickly, I think, as you say. It was really interesting that you noted the idea that because batteries are playing in so many different markets and they're not just doing this kind of arbitrage balancing, but they might also be looking at sort of grid operation services as well. That idea that you get these conflicting signals where a battery might be doing something that's really benefiting the system in one way, but is actually a hindrance or a detriment in another way. I mean, Tom, you talked earlier about the role of batteries as local balancing. Is that another layer of complexity where you've got sort of local pricing? You might have a local imbalance that's actually opposite to the national imbalance. How can battery operators sort of work with the networks, but also get the right price signals and the right operation to make sure they're fully benevolent to the system?
Yeah, I think certain high users at the moment are already being incentivized to almost come off the grid at certain times to use their own source of power. And certainly that other source of power may well end up being, for example, increased energy storage as well as generation. And we're seeing that already using separate standalone power systems when the grid is, for want of a better word, under stress. And I think the way that's incentivized is either through reduction in energy bills, but also being pushed to go off. Yes, you can come onto the grid, you can take X amount of power, but please bear in mind that we will be asking you to go off the grid at certain times. How you deal with that then becomes up to you. And I would expect to see more of that, particularly in certain sectors which are growing at the moment, such as data centers.
Absolutely, yeah. Data centers, we could probably do a whole panel on the sort of complexity and the central solution. And from your perspective, although these are, as Nikki and Verghese said, they're complexities that need to be solved, do you think there are also complexities that the networks and operators are already aware of? We might not know the exact solutions yet, but we already know that we have to work to that solution. Or is there a sort of a surprise issue coming up that hasn't been sort of pre-warned?
I think certain parts of the sector are certainly aware of it. I think, fundamentally, batteries don't make power. All they do is store power. And I think if you could start every conversation with that statement, I think that would be very useful, to go back to Nikki's very good point about a battery being charged and discharged at the same time. All it is a cup. It only holds energy. So you need to have effectively some source of power to be able to recharge that battery if it's going to discharge into the system. And I think that needs to be borne in mind. If for example, we talk about overcapacity. If the capacity is stressed, it is because either something's gone down, it's not windy, and often that can happen over a longer period of time, days, as we're in our hot streak at the moment. So I think it's important to remember that batteries can discharge, but time is critical. So you may only be able to do it on Monday, and if you've not got enough power to then recharge it, then that needs to be borne in mind.
I think possibly alluding to it there, people will have seen in the news a few days ago that a couple of coal-fired power stations was brought online first time in 50 days. And surprisingly for the UK, it was due to high demand in the summer. where we had a couple of nuclear plants being repowered or inspected and down for maintenance. We had an interconnector down. We had pretty low wind that day, even though we had a decent chunk of solar panel power. And the increased load potentially from domestic and commercial air conditioning actually meant that we had to resort to coal-fired power in that instance, which I'm sure that's something that occurs much more in places like California, where aircon is a big part of the load profile, but maybe a bit more surprising in the UK. I'll jump on to the next question, otherwise inevitably we're gonna have so much to say on all of these questions, but we'll try and get a wide range of conversations going. So, I mean, Nikki, you touched on this earlier, that there's been a lot over the last few months around grid connections. So not just storage projects, but loads of generation, storage and demand projects have been given ever longer wait periods, I guess, for connections to both the transmission and the distribution network, to the point where people are going out for connection dates and they're hearing back from their DNO or from the transmission operator that, mid-2030 is our best estimate, which, considering the UK is trying to rapidly decarbonise and ambitions for net zero power system by 2035, that doesn't really line up. There have been various announced changes. So National Grid have their 5-point plan. The ENA representing the DNOs have a 3-point plan. Ofgem have weighed in with sort of their hope that this will be pushed forward. I'll go to Nikki first, as you brought it up. What do you think of these proposals? Are these a sticking plaster, or do you think these are fundamentally good strategic plans to reform the way we connect projects to the network?
So I actually did a webinar on this the other day. Podcast. If anyone wants to listen to it. So me and
a link we can drop in the chat.
Fellow connectologists at Roadnight Taylor actually sat in this room and chatted about that for about half an hour. So if anyone wants to listen to that, then please do. On a personal level, I think something has to be done, and there's a lot of short-term actions. So National Grid are, as I said, they're looking at remodeling batteries. They're looking at their construction planning assumptions. They had the tech amnesty, which have freed up something like 8 gigawatts of capacity potentially, which is a bit of a drop in the ocean, unfortunately. We're also having huge reforms around milestone changes. So really holding projects to account in terms of, are they progressing or not? And probably the most meaningful one for sort of this year in terms of actions is actually moving, especially for the DNOs, is moving from a first come, first served queuing system to more of a first ready, first served. So, we've got all these people with connection dates of, 2000 and whatever, just because of the amount that needs to sort of theoretically be done on the grid for all of these projects that have got a relative lack of commitment, a lot of them. You don't need a huge amount of things to have a grid, to get a grid offer. With transmission applications, you don't even need a letter of authority. You don't even know you don't even have to know where you're going to build it. So I think moving, and we had these sort of conversations internally a few months ago, sort of moving from that queuing system to projects that are actually genuinely going to connect and have the ability to connect and are progressing and are getting land rights, are getting through planning, are getting financing, allowing them to connect ahead of these sort of very speculative projects. I appreciate that most grid applications are obviously going to be speculative at the time that they're put in. But there are ones that, are not viable or, can't get built through to various market failures or mechanisms. But actually allowing those projects to connect ahead of that reinforcement, albeit potentially on a constrained basis, is incredibly positive. It's also very, very complex in terms of, who's paying for reinforcement, what's your potential curtailment going to be like, what's your risk going to be like, what are your securities profiles. I alluded to it a little bit in the podcast, but about supergrid transformer replacement, where you've actually got customers having to front a huge amount of money for new transmission assets. At the moment, there's a lot of complexity in terms of that these may not be needed because of all the remodeling work that National Grid's doing. So As I said, we did a podcast on it, but it's a hugely moving beast at the moment. There's a lot going on, and there's a huge amount of uncertainty in terms of what this is going to mean for individual projects. Very positive, because as I said, something needed to be done, because any new applications are just coming out with connection dates of 20, 30, 40, whatever.
Yes.
Broadly positive in my view. As I said, and with the future system operator role, I think that's going to be really interesting in terms of potentially having capacity allocations and more sort of whole system energy planning and local area energy planning. So yeah, we'll see what comes out of that sort of wider connections reform piece. But as a next 12 months things go, it's very frustrating with the uncertainty, but positive in terms of what they're doing.
Excellent. And yeah, picking up on that uncertainty, I guess, for the networks as well. Like you said, if there's such a low barrier to entry to get that connection agreement, the network currently has no way of actually sifting through and planning for the ones that are more likely to go ahead, because it is just maybe it's a 49 megawatt connection for a battery or a solar farm, whatever, that is functionally at that level of information identical to dozens of others around the country. I saw in the Q&A that we got a request for the link to your podcast, so you definitely got some extra listeners from this panel, which is an excellent side benefit. Francesco, we talk a lot in the UK about this ever-growing pipeline of projects, and Nikki had a great number earlier, which was, we're talking over 300 gigawatts of projects that are planned, but a lot of them are not actually going to get built. We know that the attrition rate of these is quite low. Is this a problem that is unique to the UK? I know
no.
of networks and different structures and such, but is this something that's happening everywhere? So people can develop early stage storage and renewable projects very cheaply, and they can get that connection, and then they can decide sort of how far they want to go with it. Is this a universal issue?
Yes, in the US the problem is the same. So, but I think always the bottom line is it economic or not, right? And who is going to pay for whatever changes to the network that are needed? Now, if I may share a slide with the cost in the US for installed batteries, that would be great if you will let me do this.
I'm not against it. I'll defer to Jordan there as our host. Are you happy for us to share a slide, Jordan?
Yeah, that's fine.
Excellent. Yeah, go for it.
So I hope you can see this slide.
Yeah.
So this is the cost of a kilowatt hour, dollar per kilowatt hour. So it has to do with the amount of energy that can be stored and the power that can be delivered instantaneously. So as you can see on the x-axis, we have this is the 2021 cost for the different technologies of batteries, and also compare with compressed air and hydrogen. And as you can see, this is a slide that comes from the Department of Energy. They had a project on what would be the cost of energy storage. Now you can see at the moment, if we go to low power, which would be, let's say, 1 megawatt, the cost is about, let's say, for a 2 hours discharge period is $500. And when we compare that with the cost of producing electricity with natural gas or nuclear, which is a few cents, probably 5 cents. So this is 4 orders of magnitude. So that creates a big problem. So only a few markets where the electricity at certain peaks of the year, let's say in the middle of the summer in California, where there is a couple of generation stations in standby or maintenance, only at those points this will be economically viable. So as we come down or go up in the amount of energy that can be that is necessary, battery storage starts losing against the other technologies. And other technologies like compressed air or hydrogen become less expensive. So almost competitive, not quite. Even on the best conditions, let's say for the year 2030, this is a prediction. Even though all costs move to the left, so which means we're making it better, still on the best conditions, the best storage technology for large power is still about $38 per kilowatt hour. And that will be, compare that to the cost already, the sale cost, average sale cost of power in the US is 16 cents a kilowatt hour. I know the UK is a lot more, probably 3 times more than that. But and that would make these technologies more appealing, but we are still far from this, and so that's why it's not energy storage. While it's the technical solution to the full penetration of renewable energy, it's not in the next few years. It's not in the next decade either. But hopefully there is a breakthrough in materials technology, something, and we can develop it at economical level.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jose. So I always like when we can support it with data as well. That's always like a nice benefit for the more numerical people on the call. I mean, Thomas, you're involved in sort of deploying storage at the moment. What are the business cases that are working right now for the storage that is being deployed?
So it's the hybrid cases. It's where you can use your energy storage system. You've got it in place. You need it anyway, and you're basically using that asset in a more efficient way. So I think that's the way it's going to go, certainly. And I would agree with Francisco in the next few years and the next few decades. The other thing that's not really been touched on either at the moment is availability of energy storage. At the moment, everything is, these systems are largely lithium based, particularly the larger energy storage type systems. And to be honest, the market within the utility sector is going to be dwarfed by the automotive sector. So the automotive sector is going to take a lot of the battery capacity, the ability to manufacture batteries, and that again is going to ensure that the pricing, at the very least, doesn't move per kilowatt hour. We're almost running to stand still at the moment in terms of developing lithium. Yeah, that's going on. You get more out of it per kilowatt hour. The cost should, in theory, come down, but because demand is going up, then that cost is unlikely to come down again in the short and even the medium term. So we do see hybrid trying to use local solutions where the price is considerably higher than, I think, 16 cents per kilowatt hour, which I was paying that on my electricity bill, certainly. I think it comes back to what's the commercial case, and if the commercial case can justify, for example, putting in a bigger battery, using the battery on a daily basis, then that will ensure that energy storage is part of the overall system of smoothing out demand as we move to a low carbon, zero carbon economy.
Brilliant. Yes, excellent. Really, really, really good point. And that's also, both of those points have led me perfectly to the next question we have, which is the exciting one around V2X. So seems like this is gathering a bit of momentum at the moment, sort of vehicle to grid. For those on the call who aren't familiar with vehicle to grid, the idea, or vehicle to X, the idea is that if you have an electric vehicle that is plugged into your house to charge one way, in the future, could that be, or even now, actually, some vehicles are capable of it, could that be used? Could the battery that's in that vehicle be utilized to either power your home or even bypass your home and actually export directly to the grid? So could electric vehicles, there's already thousands and thousands of them. In the future, there could be millions and millions of them. They each have a battery. Could that be utilized? And like Thomas said there, utilizing batteries that already exist or functions where battery storage is already needed and getting the absolute best utilization out of them could be a way for the energy system to work economically and efficiently. But we've been talking mainly about larger scale energy storage, maybe in industrial sites, maybe all the way up at grid scale. An open question for the panel, if anyone jumps in really, is V2X competing with this larger energy storage? Are they complementary, or are they targeting completely different operations and benefits?
If I may take it?
Yes, go for it, yeah.
So I think that is a great solution. So if, let's say, the owner of an electric vehicle has sufficient space to park the car in the premises, or even better, if that person is able to put solar panels and charge during the day, and charge the batteries of the car during the day, and then discharge them at the peak. The peak is maybe a couple of hours, depending on in different locations is different. So in a suburban New York, it's probably a couple of hours, but in downtown New York, it's 6 to 8 hours. That's the peak is very long. Mm-hmm. So if there is sufficient rooftop to have solar and a car parked under a solar carport, for example, that would be the great solution, right? There's lots of solar installations going on. So where is that energy going? This energy is going during the day only, which the peak is not happening during the day. So is this infamous California duck curve, which creates a problem by having more solar power when you don't need it, creates a controllability problem for the system that needs to go from a very low generation point to the peak in a couple of hours or in 1 hour. So having moved that energy that has been generated from the sun a little bit in time, a couple of hours would do great. 6 hours would be even better. But that would be a great solution. So I don't think utilities are very happy of doing that, but that is definitely a solution. Almost saying, I want to be independent. I want to use the utility only when the sun doesn't shine. That would be, or there is no wind, right? That would be a great solution. And lots of research papers are published on that. How much is getting to industry? I don't think much. Yeah.
That's really interesting, yeah. And especially in the UK, while V2G isn't yet at that maturity level, what we have seen anecdotally from solar installers we've been talking to is that up to half of their solar installations are now also in domestic settings, but also including a home battery. So there's definitely this desire from people to, like you say, be somewhat self-sufficient in terms of utilising their solar power as much as they can. And that's even before potentially in the future moving to things like dynamic pricing, where utilising energy during peak times or when renewable energy generation is lower might actually cost people even more, and the business case for using your solar power when you want to use it rather than when the sun is shining even increases. I mean, Thomas, right at the beginning of the call, you mentioned local balancing. Do you see it all the way down at this kind of like home by home?
Very much so.
Aspects of the grid. Yeah.
Yeah. So very much so. I can see people, being incentivized to purchase, for want of a better word, a bi-directional car charger. And from that point of view, maybe they pay extra for the bi-directional, and then using their car battery to shave a little bit off their electricity bill, even before we get any sort of dynamic pricing. And certainly as we move into it, if we're paying more between 6 and 8, I think that's definitely going to come in, and I could see a lot of individual households doing that. Secondly, I think large electricity users will be very interested in doing that. I could see, for example, supermarkets, you could see them building a large number of chargers. You can, feel free to plug your car in while you're doing the shopping, but also, why don't you give us your electricity between certain periods of time? But these places are possibly already on dynamic pricing. So all of those models and I think it will be driven from the user side rather than pushed from the utility side.
Absolutely. And your point around industry as well, we're talking about domestic vehicles, but there's a huge amount of fleet vehicles that are currently looking to electrify. And there's the benefit there that the company if it's a company-owned fleet rather than a sort of off-company fleet, they're able to control, and they see a financial benefit to utilising their battery more to contribute or get benefit to their energy system. Then they will obviously want to do that as best they can. Nikki, do you have any thoughts on sort of this interaction between V2X? Is it the solution, or is there going to be space for grid scale storage as well going forward?
I think it's an interesting one. I think it kind of comes into that consumer transformation scenario and a future energy scenarios in terms of people actually engaging with their energy use a lot more. We've just got to be careful of sort of issues of social equity and everything, and making sure that everyone has a facility to play in those markets and to benefit from that.
Absolutely, yeah. The just transition angle is something that we should always be completely aware of, that we don't want the benefits of this the really exciting evolution in the system just to be a small group of people who have sort of the capital or the ability to pay and take advantage of those situations. It has to be water rising every ship. I've forgotten the acronym somewhat. We do have a question.
There is addition. I think there is an additional concern to the V2G and on V2X, which is currently in certain markets like California, they already have problems on where to charge their cars. Those that don't have space in their homes to charge their cars are now struggling because of the incentives in the state to where to charge. And they say that I was talking to somebody yesterday, say I have to wake up at 5 a.m. to charge my car. So otherwise, all the spots will be taken. So this range anxiety of the vehicles is a serious concern, since charging is not available everywhere. So if you tell people that are already having range anxiety to discharge the car to sell electricity, I don't think it would be possible in the short term.
Agree. That would be a very tough sell. And I mean, that's something that speaks to what Nikki said about just transition. Not everyone has an off-street parking space, especially in dense urban areas like London and New York and such. So specific pockets of those areas would not, unless there's some very clever mechanism, potentially not have access to solar PV, home batteries, vehicle grid. We had a question in one of the last sessions, which I think we can try and answer here, which is around how do we actually incentivize consumers to adopt V2G? So, I mean, we saw the Octopus demand flexibility trials. I believe they were sort of paying the equivalent of £1 per kilowatt hour for people to turn down their demand. Now, that was a trial, and that was obviously somewhat higher than the level we might expect. But does it have? Are there going to be major barriers, first of all, in the financial benefit for people actually doing the V2G, when on a daily basis they maybe are looking at pennies and thinking that might not be something I want to engage with? And do we also have to make it incredibly well automated? Because no one, as Francesco said, no one really wants to get up at 5 a.m. to plug in their car or turn it to export mode. Does it? Are we going to have to make this as seamless as possible? Nikki and Thomas, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that from sort of the UK perspective.
I think I can see that being the way that it's going to go, and I think it's also the cost of the infrastructure to put some of these stuff, the charging points in, for example. I think energy storage at a local, almost next to every charging point, may be something that will be required to buffer the demand. Secondly, I think how are those charging points going to be paid for? And I think one of the ways that they may be paid for is by saying, yes, you can plug them in, but also if you do choose to do that, we may also choose to either throttle back or take some of that power at certain periods of time. So again, I think it's all part of the energy storage. It's just all part of a larger system, if you like. And I think, yeah, we can cover the cost of the infrastructure through putting the electricity back or the power back into the system. But it needs to be, ultimately, it's a commercial decision.
Absolutely. Brilliant. We've only got a few minutes left, so I want to get on to our final question, which is alludes to a bit of what Francesco highlighted in his graph earlier, which is when we're talking about energy storage, I'm very guilty of sort of, I say energy storage when I'm talking about batteries, but actually in the UK, there's a wide range of energy storage that is already in place in terms of, we've had pumped hydro for decades and decades, and the SSE has recently announced that they're looking to develop more of that over the coming years. We've obviously got this big pipeline of lithium battery projects, and a few of them being deployed already. We've also got some really exciting innovations looking at liquid air or compressed air energy storage or high density pumped hydropower. And then if you go all the way, you've got things like potentially green hydrogen that was being used to produce power. That's a form of very long-term energy storage. So a question for the whole panel is, are these batteries, when we talk about lithium batteries, is that just because they're the first mover or the flavor of the month, or are they sort of one out? Are they going to be the default form of energy storage on the system going forward?
In my view, it depends on the size of the installation. If it is a few kilowatts, then batteries will be the way to go. And only when you go to much larger projects, then you will go into compressed air or pumped hydro or hydrogen. So it depends on two things: on the size of the project and the time in which you want to discharge. You want to discharge in 2 hours, batteries will be the way to go. But if you want to discharge in 10 hours or 20 hours, then different technologies are getting there better.
Absolutely. I mean, Nikki, you mentioned earlier that we're seeing a big scaling up of these applications for energy storage. We've gone from, a few megawatts on the distribution network to the one at Cell Ahead that's 280 megawatts, really, really huge batteries. Are these actually going to happen? Or as Francesco said, are these going to get, is it going to get beaten out by technologies that may be more suited to that really, really big energy storage?
I think it's certainly an interesting question about how much storage we need and about what it's going to be. If you look at how much contracted capacity we've got, according to the National Grid's future energy scenarios, we have a huge amount more contracted storage capacity than we need. And a vast majority of that is going to be lithium ion. I think we need to be very conscious of the fact that there's a very finite resource of lithium and that we should use it very carefully. Interestingly enough, I actually saw something about there being more pumped hydro schemes being built in Scotland, which is great because that's sort of using the benefits of our geography to actually utilise those as a storage mechanism. As I said, I think we need to be very, very cognizant of the fact there's not a lot of lithium, and what's in the ground we should be very, very careful about digging up because, lithium mining is not it's a very, very environmentally degrading process. Just because we don't see it, it doesn't mean that it's not affecting somebody somewhere and a lot of landscapes and sort of huge biodiversity loss. So we need to be very cognizant of that. There are loads of other storage technologies that we can look at. Currently, lithium ion is kind of the easiest and the most cost viable. So we need to sort of do as much of that as we need to. But only so much of that is going to be able to utilize markets in the future. I think we also need to be looking at much more long-term storage. There are lots of ways we can do it. There's lots of very innovative ways we can do it. You've got gravitational energy storage. You've got liquid air energy storage. There's lots and lots of different ways we can do this. And I think if the sort of current transition tools has taught us anything, it's that we need diversity in an energy system, so that when we have days that are not windy and very, very cold, then we don't have these huge issues on the grid with potentially having to turn on oil power stations and maybe ask people to turn off. And we need to be very cognizant of having different storage for different scenarios, and that includes very long-term storage as well.
Absolutely brilliant. Just before I hand back to Jordan, I'm going to cheekily overrun by a couple of minutes. Thomas, did you have any thoughts on sort of this idea, the future balance of different storage technologies on the system?
Yeah, I think I agree with my colleagues that it's lithium has a role to play, but it's certainly not the full answer. Personally, I think hydrogen will certainly become more and more important, both from a fuel cell point of view and how we develop that for vehicles as well as energy storage. And again, I keep coming back to this point that the automotive sector is really going to start to take a large amount of the lithium that's currently in the ground. And I think the final thing that we all need to remember, and I think we're beginning to see this now, is that as we move towards a lithium-based energy storage, we're going to have to start to do something with the lithium product as it comes to the end of its life. And I think that's going to be a challenge in the short to medium term as well, because at the end of this life, it costs a lot of energy apart from anything else to do something with the batteries.
Absolutely. I'm sure we could, and with all these discussions, we could end up talking for a full another hour on hydrogen and lithium recycling and all these kind of questions. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. But thank you to all my panelists. I thought it was a really, really interesting discussion. Lots of different perspectives and lots of really interesting conversation that bore out of it. I'll pass you back to Jordan at Powered On Live now. Thank you, everyone.